Hmm.
Okay, so all the time I was talking, I was on mute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
And you also
so
dropped out of the
yes, all
Twitter
right.
space.
Yeah, I'll edit this out later, but I was explaining I dropped out of the Twitter Spaces because it's not going to let me join on the computer to share the Twitter Spaces into the live stream if I'm on it
Oh,
on my
oh,
phone.
oh, oh, okay, okay.
So what I was saying is I'm really excited about this course. I've been wanting to get into Rumi for the longest time, and I've been shamefully neglecting that. And so this opportunity where you're going to curate a bunch of his poems and talk to us about the journey that you've taken studying his works and what they've meant to you, and sort of lead us by the hand down that same road is really exciting to me. And I'm really looking forward to it. I was saying that this course is going to be one of a series of different mystics that we look at inside of a largely literary approach to examining their works, but not a solely literary approach. So I'll talk about mysticism as such, and then we'll kick it off into part two, where you talk to us generally about Rumi, and then we're going to kick right into the course today and get right into some of the poems and experience them and meditate with them and discuss them as a group. Um, Before we do that, do you have a poem that you'd like to read to get us started?
Yeah, of course. I can read one that is called um, "Who Says Words with My Mouth." Okay, so it goes like this. All day I think about it, then at night I say it. Where did I come from? And what am I supposed to be doing? I have no idea. My soul is from elsewhere, I'm sure of that, and I intend to end up there. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. When I get back around to that place, I'll be completely sober. Meanwhile, I'm like a bird from another continent, sitting in this aviary. The day is coming when I fly off. But who is it now in my ear who hears my voice? Who says words with my mouth? Who looks out with my eyes? What is the soul? I cannot stop asking. If I could taste one sip of an answer, I could break out of this prison for drunks. I didn't come here of my own accord, and I can't live that way. Whoever brought me here will have to take me home. This poetry, I never knew what I'm going to say. I don't plan it. When I'm outside the saying of it, I get very quiet and rarely speak at all.
Wow, that's a fantastic way to get started. So we're going to develop some theories and some we're going to identify some principles that these mystics are using. There were a couple of them being used there. It's quite an impressive poem. It kind of feels insulting to start talking about it. Actually, I just sort of want to let it wash over me a little bit. That's
Yeah.
That's really a heck of a thing. That's a good poem to start with. I
I
like
can
that.
say one thing about this poem. It resonates with so many other traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism, even Christian mysticism. It resonates with so many of these things that have parallels with what Rumi here said, and the philosophers in general that try to figure out the self.
That's right. That's right. Okay, good. So let's get through the boring part, and then we'll get back into that exciting part. So mysticism. So this is our one fifth of the literary curriculum we're going to put together is the section on mysticism. One of the questions we're going to ask us is there such a thing as an experience that you can't just explain to somebody? Is there inarticulable reality, right? Something that isn't propositional. And so if you look up mysticism, there's a lot of different definitions and ideas about what it is. It's, becoming one with the divine, or it's just an encounter with the divine. It can be referring to transformative contemplation, religiously induced states of ecstasy, disciplined approaches to achieving altered states of consciousness. There's something that emerges out of these is that, whatever it is, it's experiential, it's spiritual, and it's transformative. So a mystical experience is usually described by the person having it as an encounter with meaning or the divine, which leaves them forever changed and which they regard as valuable. So the question we're going to be asking in this course is, okay, let's look at some mystical literary texts, and we'll define what that means in a second. And we're going to run the experiment to say, well, is there such a thing? And if there is, can we get to it by examining different mystical approaches? So there are some major paths to mystical accomplishment. We're going to look at the poetic. In this course, we're going to be spending 90% of our time reading and discussing Rumi's poems. We'll do other mystics and other poetic mystics as well, but this course is solely focused on Rumi. But there's methodological religious discipline that can get you there. In other words, a set out schedule of fasting and prayer or something, right? There are people who report. Now you can write a book about how to do that, but the book itself is not trying to get you to the mystical experience necessarily. It can just be a book of, if you do these things, then this is the path you can take. And then you'll have, after 30 years, some enlightenment or something like that. There's philosophical approaches, experiential naturalism. So there's people who talk about, again, you could write a book about it. You go and look at a sunset and experience nature and climb a mountain and things like that. There's people who report that. We're going to look more at the philosophic. So I've skipped it for a quick second. There's another path that people talk about. I put it in red because I'm personally not interested in this path for myself. Jung had this saying, beware of wisdom you have not earned. And I'm not trying to throw away that path because I've included it here largely because some people I respect a great deal have their self-account is that's the way that they got to a transcendent enlightenment was through that path. But it seems it's not recommended by me because I find it dangerous and I'm not interested. It occurred to me that one of the ways of describing, because people describe this experience, but it's not something that is propositional where you can just hear what somebody says and accept the argument or disagree with the argument. Now you've got a proposition that you own. It's people talking about an experience. And so there's something very tricky about this where I listen to the way people from different paths talk about it, and they seem to be talking about a similar thing. And it seems like one of the ways that you could get there is simply being what's called in the zone, right? When an artist is painting, sometimes their tongue is hanging out. And when your tongue is hanging out, it's because you're so focused on what you're doing. You're so in what you're doing that you forgot to keep your tongue in your mouth. And I'm not saying that that's the sum total of something like a mystical experience or anything like that, but it seems like there's an ingredient of losing oneself in what you're doing. And so there may be these other paths of just real committed engagement with familial or social responsibility, meaningful artistic development accompanied by major accomplishment, something like that. I haven't walked those paths. I mean, I can't say, oh, if you are a genius artist, you can have a revelatory experience, but I'm including them because we're looking at people's reports of what's accomplishable. So the question is, if it can't be explained or fully transmitted in propositional statements, how can literary works get us there? We have prosaic and poetic approaches to mysticism, and that's what we're going to be looking at through a literary lens, or largely through a literary lens in these courses. And this first course is focused on Rumi. But how is it possible that if you can't just tell somebody something and they can agree or disagree with it, that you could transmit it in a book? Well, the author of a mystical work is not attempting to straightforwardly tell you something. Instead, they're attempting to induce within the willing participant the sought after mystical experience. Okay, so this implies an awful lot about how one has to approach a work like this. So it means that there's correct and incorrect ways of approaching such a text. Before we get into that, though, so we're not saying that the author can do this. We're saying they're explicitly claiming that their design of their work is to do this. And the people who are their acolytes or who follow their path report that, yes, if you meditate on this work, if you go through the journey of what's been written there and have it read you while you're reading it, it can get you to a mystical experience. There's no way that you can have a peer-reviewed scientific article where you say, oh, we've measured all the people who have had this experience, because by definition, it's experiential, it's subjective. But I don't mean subjective as in it's just illusory. I just mean that it is an effect on a subject. However, we can look at what people report, and that can count as a kind of scientific evidence, which we'll talk about later. We're not talking about the scientific approach right now, but so there are correct and incorrect ways of approaching such a text. So we're going to look at mystical texts in this series of courses, and the first one is Rumi, and we're going to approach it in a certain way. C.S. Lewis had this interesting thing. He said, imagine you're in a barn, and there's a beam of light coming through a crack in the door. You can measure the length of the beam of light. You can measure its width and its breadth, right? You can do all sorts of analyzing of the beam of light, and that's one way of looking at the beam of light. Or you can turn your head and let the beam of light hit you right in the eye. That's another way of looking at the beam of light, or looking along the beam of light, as he talks about. So an incorrect way of reading a work like this, if you're going to try to judge its mystic. Now, one of the things we said is we're going to look at it through a literary perspective, but it's not possible to only make literary observations about works like these if the works themselves are explicitly claiming to be about inducing mystical experience. You can't just ignore that and say, oh, it's a pleasant book, or it's an unpleasant book, or it's well written, or it's not well written. You can't do that type of conversation and just ignore the fact that the entire book is either absurd and laughable, or it's profound and powerful based on what it is that it said it's trying to do. So an incorrect way of reading a work like this would be to argue logically with the claims. The author may not even believe things that are claimed in the book. This is really cool. This is something really insightful about mystical texts. The person is telling you things to induce an effect, which means they don't have to actually believe the things they're saying. What if their artistic or their formulaic approach is to say, well, if you think about this, and then you think about this, and then this idea is introduced, then that will help set your brain up to clear away the things that would get in the way of your revelatory experience, or something like that. And so to take any one of those claims and say, oh, well, the author is claiming this, and I can argue against it, or I can accept it, and therefore I've understood what he's trying to do, is to completely miss the point, right? You have to just sort of get into it and say, okay, you're going to take me on a journey of things to think about. And it might not be obvious to me sometimes why we've changed subjects all of a sudden. But the reason for all of that, and we'll get into the methodology and the principles that they use as they start to emerge. But the reason is, it's always aimed at the end, I should say. It's always aimed at the end, whatever the reasons are. it's aimed at the end of inducing the mystical experience. And that's sort of the large scale way that we have to be judging the text. So it's insightful. The author might not even believe any of the things they're saying, but the things they're saying are not designed to be expressions of what they believe, and they're not designed to be arguments for you to agree with them. They're designed to induce, at the end of the journey, a spiritual experience. They aren't written to be adopted or agreed with. They are written to take one on a journey through thoughts and thought processes in an attempt to induce or make possible that mystical experience. The correct way is to sort of let the work read you and get into it like you would any fiction. Shall we move on?
It's important also to address the word spiritual, which comes from the Latin spiritus, which equates with the Greek word pneuma, and the Eastern words ki and chi and prana, etc., etc., etc. So what I'm trying to infer, or what I'm interpreting when I hear you say a spiritual experience, is an experience that is related to our inner world, an experience that is related to our perhaps most essential part of the self, that is less contingent, less changeable, maybe even persistent across time, maybe even timeless according to some traditions like Brahmanism. We are not sure about its nature.
That's right.
That's why it's really important that we try to look within, and thus the utmost importance of mysticism, I'd say.
That's right. Now, that's interesting. It brings up an interesting point, because there's a continuum here, because all literature is subjective in that way, right? It's all, just regular literary works that are not mystical works are trying to induce feelings and emotions in you, and they're subjective. But then what you talked about, so maybe I should use the word transcendent, right? So a mystical text is doing in a literary manner what literary works do, but it's attempting to do sort of this large scale cosmic conscious, like an understanding of the universe as a whole, or introduce you to the face of God, like whatever language you want to use for it. Something transcendent is what it's trying to accomplish. Does that work?
Yeah, well, I think so, but let me give you another idea. We have the James Webb Telescope, which is the top-notch thing that is pointed outward. That's the greatest achievement so far in that regard. What we are trying to do with mysticism is we're trying to fashion our thoughts and our minds into a kind of similar accomplishment as the James Webb, but pointed inward, and to study whatever there is inward. And probably that study won't be entirely philosophical, because when we look inward, we feel feelings, and we think thoughts, and some of these feelings will tell us about ourselves. And in some regards, some of these lessons might be universal across sentient beings, across human beings, etc. And so yeah, maybe the transcendent word is apt, but it's a very specific kind of transcendence. It's an inward facing transcendence, not a materialist outward transcendence.
Yeah. I was about to say that's really good. Let's move on, because I want that to be the last word. But then what you said at the very end, I just want to say, it reminds me of this idea that we had of this is within mythopoetry, of that mythopoetic understanding that knowledge of the world is knowledge of the self, and knowledge of the self is knowledge of the world, right? So you're trying to comprehend the cosmos not by objectifying it and looking out, but by understanding it as a place where characters manifest and experience and develop, and with yourself primarily as the first character you know the most about. And yeah, that was beautiful, man. That's I really like this image of the telescope. We'll come back to that.
You have to remember one thing. I just left the second session that we've done on Indian philosophy, and we just analyzed some of the Upanishads, and they really drive the nail really deep in emphasizing know the self as best as you can, and if you know the self as best as you can, you will also know really deep stuff about the cosmos overall. They just go mention that so many times.
I wish I hadn't missed that. I'm gonna have to watch it and join you again later. This image of the telescope that looks at the vast cosmos, searching for stars within the soul, that's a heck of an image, man. Okay, so for those of you who are already screaming out your skepticism and saying, like, wait a minute, hold on, I don't have to accept that there's a transcendent, and I don't have to accept the books are going to get me there. That's okay. This course is still for you, because we're not doctrinaire about any of this, and we're also not sure what we're going to conclude. So one of the ways of viewing this course is as an experiment that says, well, if we approach it properly, do we come to the conclusion that it didn't work for me? Maybe it works for other people. It's subjective. I can't prove it doesn't, but it didn't work for me. Maybe I'm built in such a way that it would never work for me, or maybe this wasn't the right book for me, or maybe I deny that books like this can do this. I mean, all of those conclusions are still on the table for anybody who wants to go down the route of exploring this and saying, okay, let's look at a curriculum of mystical texts and see. They claim to be able to do something. Let's see if they can do it. So we still have to approach it the right way and say, well, that's the experiment we're going to run. We're not going to shortcut the experiment by sort of blocking our ears to the possibility. We're going to read it with an open mind and see what it does to our consciousness. And at the end of this introduction, I sense the anxiety to get there sooner. But at the end of this introduction, we're going to talk about neuroscience and investigations into what makes these things possible and different scholarly theories about what's happening. Is it being constructed by the mystic? Is it that there is a universal truth and all these different mystical paths are getting at it? You know, those are things that are open for debate, and we'll discuss them from time to time, and that's all completely appropriate. So none of what we're doing here requires you to have a religious perspective, to believe in anything spiritual. You absolutely can, and you can have that journey and you can report about it. That's also all acceptable. But what we're doing is primarily looking at these texts without blinding ourselves to what they're claiming to do, right? We're not going to pretend that they're not claiming to do that and then just ignore the point of the text, but we're going to do our best to experience it and judge it and say, wow, you know, this is a heck of a book. Did it trick me? Did it hypnotify me into believing something happened when it didn't? Is it just emotionally powerful and I'm adding on to it my metaphysics? You know, all of those theories are completely fine. But what we're going to do primarily is just read the works and see what happens to us while we're reading them. So that, I don't think I have to repeat any of that, but you are... All right, so what we're not going to do is say that the book is false or it made false claims, because it's not trying to make claims to begin with. It's trying to be something you can experience. So attempt to experience it and judge it there. And when you're in that place, you can say, the book doesn't do anything to me. It seems like pleasant poetry, and that's it. That's a fine conclusion if you want to come to that. But what we're not going to do is sit there. I think I made a slide on this. We can move on. Well, I made a slide later on it. What we're not going to do is sit there and say, oh, well, you claimed X and I can prove it's wrong. That's not what these books are trying to do. We have philosophy courses, and some of the texts that do mysticism are also philosophy books, and we can look at those in our mysticism course, and we can also look at them in the philosophical course. And in the philosophical course, that's the appropriate place for having propositional arguments. What we're doing here is literature. We're trying to read and experience the book and see what it does. So let's move on. Some of these are books writing, as you've noticed, books guiding one on any of the paths are possible, of course. But so I've already said all this. So you could write a book about going into nature and finding transcendence. You could write a book about psychedelics and finding transcendence. You could write a book about fasting and prayer and how you can reach transcendence that way. Mysticism books are not books about finding transcendence. Rather, the book itself is analogously, that's the nature you're supposed to be experiencing. That's the psychedelic drug you're supposed to be taking, is the book itself. That's the fasting and the prayer, is the book itself. So some of these books, cross back and forth between the two, right? They'll talk about it. In fact, most of them, at least the prosaic ones, will talk about how to reach transcendence while also trying to induce it at the same time. What makes it a mystical work is if it's attempting to take you on a path where you can experience a mystical revelatory experience. And so that's pretty clear, right? We can move on from that.
Let's go.
Okay. Okay, so really quickly, let's just briefly look at a few literary paths to mysticism. There are philosophical ones like the Meditations of Descartes. You know, at the end of the third meditation, Descartes, before he moves on to the fourth meditation, he writes, "But before I prosecute this any further, continuing his philosophical investigations and asking of questions, or pry into another truthus, excuse me, which may be deduced from this, I am willing here to stop and dwell upon the contemplation of this God that he's just proved exists, to consider with myself his divine attributes, to behold, admire, and adore the loveliness of this immense light, as much as possibly I am able to accomplish with my dark understanding. For as by faith we believe that the greatest happiness of the next life consists alone in the contemplation of the divine majesty." All right, we won't have to read the rest of the quote. Look at the language he's using there. He's revealing that his philosophical treatise, which is a philosophical treatise, is there to clarify all the wrong ideas and get them out of the way so that you can immediately experience and be overwhelmed by the loveliness of this immense light, right? So he's revealing that his meditation is a mystical text and that it can be read philosophically, and that's great. We did read it in a recent class of ours, and we dealt with the arguments that way, but it's also at the same time a mystical text. So that's just an example of mysticism in philosophy.
It looks like he is constructing a lens, basically, that works, a lens that works and it's pointed inward, a bit like how I use the visual metaphor of the telescope. And we
Yes,
need to clear out.
That's exactly right.
We need to clear out the medium, and the medium is our thoughts, cognitions that might be confusing us with all the turbidity of the noise. And one of the things that is really common with all these means to experience the inner essential cosmos is a mental state in which the noise of thoughts is somehow suppressed or cleared out with meditation or sama with the whirling dervish thing, or even the psychedelics as well. Yeah, go ahead. Or being stunned by a work of art like a poem.
That's right. And I mean, Descartes, he's explicit about it. It's over and over and over again. He's saying, come with me on a journey. Let's deconstruct our brains until we don't even believe there's objects around us. I mean, if you really go on the meditative journey, it's a meditation. If you really go on it with him, he's trying to do all of it through philosophy, but what he's trying to accomplish is mysticism. Let me go on mute really quickly and be right back. So it's not just literature it's poetry put on top of his meditations where, oh, that's pleasant and nice to think about. He's really saying, let's go into this place and it's almost like a dark night of the soul where he can't tell if he's upside down or right side up and nothing seems real to him anymore. he's not just talking about doing that, he's doing it, and doing it in a way where he's inviting you to do it with him. And so it's a philosophical approach to mysticism. I only bring it up as an example. In The Dark Night of the Soul, we're sort of cheating because it's actually all about a poem. But if you look at the language really quickly, so he takes this poem and then there's exposition on it. And so in this first stanza, the soul relates the way and manner which it followed in going forth. Let me make this bigger so I can read it more fluently. There we go. As to its affection from itself and from all things, and in dying to them all and to itself, by means of true mortification, in order to attain to living the sweet and delectable life of love with God. And it says that this going forth from itself and from all things, it continues. And then later he says, into this dark night, souls begin to enter when God draws them forth from the state of beginners, which is the state of those that meditate on the spiritual road, and begins to set them in the state of progressives, which is that of those who are already contemplatives, to the end that after passing through it, they may arrive at the state of the perfect, which is that of the divine union of the soul with God. Wherefore, to that end, that we may the better understand and explain what night is, and as it goes on. So look, there's two things to notice. One, he's clearly doing a mystical thing where he's talking about getting to a mystical experience. But look at the language. He's also using, what should we say? Well, we'll develop theories about what he's using later, but there's technique in the way he's writing in a prosaic way about this that is designed to through imagery and hypnosis or persuasion techniques, reorder and sort of dance with your mind to bring it to the place that he's trying to get it to. And it's very beautiful. All right. So one can easily see, all right, so that's what I wrote about there. All right, these works can be read in a number of approaches. You can read, all right, so you could read a mystical text religiously, and we're going to have courses on, this is sort of half and half what we're going to do here, because we're going to have to be reading it as a devotee, or at least we're going to try to be doing it that way and literally. We can read mystical texts philosophically. We can read them historically. We're primarily going to be reading them literarily, but literature makes you feel things, right? So it's not like we say literarily and that takes away all the subjective. It's like, no, there's a lot of subjective in there. So we're going to sort of be doing this religiously and literarily is actually probably what I would say, which again, just reminds us the wrong way to read Hamlet is to say, well, the Elsinorian dynasty probably didn't have a successor at that time in that place who uttered the phrase to be or not to be, or even was contemplating existence itself, right? It's just a silly, stupid, like you missed the point. You didn't get the point of Hamlet if you're arguing like that. And likewise, there's plenty of room for arguments like that, but that's not exactly what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be getting into the story and seeing what happens. However, we cannot read these stories that are explicitly about mystical experience and ignore the fact that they're explicitly about them. So we're gonna run the experiment. We've already said this before. We don't need to repeat it. All right, since they are literary works, we'll look at the psychology, the poetry, the emotional power, the literary devices. We will not be able to ignore the spiritual project or the transcendence project or the enlightenment project, or let's just call it the mystical project that they're attempting to accomplish and to be. And so we won't ignore it. However, these same books and texts will be examined in other classes from philosophical, historical, religious, and we may even have like a more intense religious or spiritual perspective where you say, look, and we'll have time for these texts over in those courses.
It's also really important to tackle the word religion or religious.
Yeah, okay,
Literally, the word religion comes from religare, from the Latin, which means to reconnect. And so if we are really engaging with the word religion earnestly and honestly, we are trying to establish connections that might be even very strong connections. So connections between us as an external personality with our deeper self. Arguably, that connection has work to do always. Also, the connection between us and the sublime, whatever it may be, God, Brahman, Tao, logos, whatever, we don't know. There's so many unknowns there. We don't even know the self, which is arguably closer, much less whatever it is that underpins the cosmos. And then we can also foster better connections between each other, each different personas, different individual, different personalities, different atmans, as Indians might say. So there is a lot to unpack with the word religion, without even going into specific denominations and
Yep.
sects and
Good.
traditions, etc. Just the broadest aspect of what the word religion means, I'd say, is, in a nutshell, to try to foster connections, healthy connections.
That's good. I like that definition. Which also, so what we're going to do is we're going to be considering those things, right? We're not going to ignore them. We're not going to ignore the historical, the philosophical, or the religious impact of the books, or attempted impact of the books. We're going to have those conversations. So one of the things that's interesting about religious paths is that there's sort of a doctrinaire, official, authoritative path, and also a prophetic and a mystical, and there seems to be both of those paths in most religions, and that there's a dialogue between both of them. You can think of the prophets and the kings talking back and forth, Samuel and David, Nathan and Saul, and I meant to say Saul and David, Nathan and Samuel. It doesn't matter. You can see these communications between these
and
things.
in the east, you have the Kshatriyas, which are the rulers, the kings, the noble warriors, and the Brahmins going back and forth, sometimes even switching roles. Instead of the Brahmins telling the Kshatriyas how it is, it's the other way around. Siddhartha was a Kshatriya who turned completely a spiritual teacher and philosophical teacher. So this back and forth goes on, whether east or west.
Exactly. Right. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at that to some degree. I mean, in this course, we're mostly going to be focusing on Rumi, but there's other courses within this mysticism. And we'll be looking at Christian, Catholic, Jewish, other forms of mysticism are going to be in this curriculum by the time we're done. So in the literary curriculum, we've got 6 different stages. We're never going to do a course on bad literature, but they go from myth, mysticism, epics, foundational or traditional literature. I'm not going to go into the deeper, explanations of these. And then good literature, and then, bad literature at the bottom. But here's where we are. We're in mysticism right now, and we're actually looking at Rumi. So we're within Islamic mysticism. And so of these different types of literature, regular literature as such is sort of divided on this pyramid. You've got bad literature at the bottom, escapist literature, escapist fantasy, not all fantasy, but escapist fantasy, pulp fiction, romance novels, literotica, porn, things like that. That's maybe at the bottom. But then, anything that relates to reality, that imagination expanding, depicts being well, has something to say about what it's like to be in the world, that's doing a good job of being a part of the humanities as a whole. You can think of all your favorite novels, and they probably go in there. A level higher would be masterpieces or archetypes of genres, philosophically or historically extremely profound works. So, if Fahrenheit 451 and 1984 and A Separate Peace, if those are good literature, in the masterpieces, you might have something like Milan Kundera's Immortality, or Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. Actually, probably 6 works by Salman Rushdie, to be honest.
I would even suggest
100 Years of Solitude.
Mikhail Bulgakov's Master and Margarita. He normally wrote quite expediently his books. This one was the last one, took 12 years with many rewrites. He published it and then he died. So wow. it looked like quite a prophetic delivery on his part. And yeah, it's quite remarkable as well.
Well, we're going to have courses in each of these sections, and in those courses, we'll be reading most often. We'll be reading the entire work. So maybe you need to give us a course on that because that sounds really good. Epics, fate of the nation and the main character are tied together. Fate of the nation and your response to the book, cosmically significant books that epics were including Homer's Odyssey and a whole bunch of others. Maybe the 1001 Nights, is he in one of those top two categories, something like that. In any case. The eye floating above the pyramid is the two other sections. We've got a course on Ovid that we're doing in mythology. This is our first course in mysticism. So we're going to be doing Rumi, and that's where it fits. So this is just a where are you in the context of all of this curriculum that we're putting together. And as far as the literature part goes, that's where you are. You are here, and we're going to be doing mysticism. So this is close to the last slide. Here's some other questions that we'll consider along the way. Primarily, we want to enjoy the text or experience the text, like we talked about too many times already, allowing them to run their experiments on us. We'll do this from a literary and religious, quasi-religious, half and half perspective, considering other relevant questions when appropriate. From time to time, we'll also look at mysticism by exploring the following questions. So every once in a while, we're going to zoom out and have the meta discussion. Most 90% of the course is going to be just experiencing Rumi's works and talking about what they made us feel and think and exploring that. Occasionally, we might step out and have a conversation about perennialism, which Roger gave a brief, I hate getting older and forgetting words, a nice summation of the idea a second ago, which is the idea that there's this transcendent truth out there, and all these different mystical approaches are trying to get at it, and they're sort of all saying the same thing or trying to say something true about a reality that we live in. But there's a constructionist approach, which is saying, no, the books themselves are making this happen within you, but it's not about something real in the world. It's just that the works are doing that. So we'll have a discussion debating that when it's appropriate from time to time. Attribution theory is, I think, a form of constructionism. Well, we don't have to get into it, but we'll talk about the dialogue between these mystical traditions and science. We'll look at neuroscience. There's some really interesting experiments that have been done recently about mystical experiences that can be reliably induced in people. And what's shocking is if you do the material things to induce the mystical experience in someone, and they don't have the mystical experience, nothing happens. But if they do have the mystical experience with all of the same attenuated physical things that you did to induce it, they get off drugs for the rest of their lives. Like they consider it one of the 5 most meaningful things that ever happened to them. When I got married, when my first child was born, and this mystical experience that was induced in me in a lab. And so that's a kind of evidence that these things are real and that they're possible and that they could be very profoundly connected to life and how you live in life, which is a good way of suggesting maybe they're connected to reality. And, there's lots of debates we can have. And so we'll have those conversations. Occasionally, we'll talk about what we talked about a second ago, the dialogue, the conversation between the prophetic and the doctrinaire religious traditions, between mysticism and philosophy, which we've hinted at talking about. But, there's a lot of, I only brought up one as an example, but there's a lot of philosophical works that are attempting to do mysticism at the same time. There's mystical works that are making points about philosophical ideas, and there's conversations between those two. And we'll look at that occasionally. At least in the broader scope of all of our mysticism courses. Again, 95% of the time, we're going to be focused on just experiencing Rumi. And I shouldn't even use the word just because it could be interpreted wrong. We're going to be enjoying diving into Rumi like crazy, and it's going to be really fun. And we'll also look at mysticism and its relationship to other forms of literature. And we've hinted at all of that already so far. So with that being done, I'm going to... how's the spaces looking? Because I know we're trying to broadcast in 2 different locations right now. Oh, you're on mute.
The space is for now just me. Suspicious, who is accompanying us here on YouTube, he has asked a very interesting question that I was just about to answer on I was just about to answer through text, but since we get the opportunity, I would like to address it with voice. So he asked, does mysticism somehow delve into meditation? Like, what's the motivation behind the desire to sit quietly? Does it guarantee psychological reward or spiritual reward? So it's a really important and good question that he makes, which is, what's in it for us in terms of return on investments if we invest in this path. uh, this is, I think, the most important question before starting is, what can we get out of activities that are related to mysticism. Suspicious mentioned meditation, but meditation is but merely one of the possibilities. As if you could go so nicely go to the slide with the possibilities of study of mysticism, which is practically the first slide, I think, um, where you even marked in red one of the possibilities that, yeah, exactly. So we can attempt to learn a bit more about ourselves, about our personalities, about human nature, about what it feels like to be angry, what it feels like to be envious, what it feels like to be grief stricken, etc., etc. It's a bit like as if our soul, and that when I say soul, I'm saying really our minds, the most essential part of our mind. That's what I mean by soul. What if it were equated to a musical instrument? Are we really knowledgeable about all the notes that it can make? Um, Maybe we only can play a few notes that we are less knowledgeable about by reading and feeling a poem, or by studying some philosophical texts that have some also poetic flavor to them, or engage in practices like daily practices like journaling or meditation, like journaling like the Stoics do, or meditation like the Buddhists do, or self-reflection at the end of the day, like analyzing what we did well and giving us a pat on the back, and analyzing what we did less well, and reprimanding ourselves to avoid doing these things in future. So it's a really important question, and I think that the payoffs of us becoming even more knowledgeable about ourselves than, say, the algorithms of Twitter, Amazon, Facebook, etc., know about ourselves, has huge ramifications as we can we can increase our self mastery. We can, for instance, see that we are about to become angry because someone said something that might tempt us into anger, like an attempt at insult, and we kind of catch us in the act of becoming angry, and we instead of becoming angry in a way that we might lash out to that person, we instead redirect that anger and process it in a more healthy way for ourselves as an individual, and a more ethically resounding way in terms of our interactions with others. And as you can see, I'm just looking at one individual. Imagine a bunch of people in society that are more worked up, more proficient in this thing of self knowledge. We can really upgrade how society works by having more people with better self knowledge. So I'd say that the returns on investment are beyond our comprehension as of now, because we are so far from this ideal.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
I, I,
So
I hope I answered the question, Suspicious, and feel free to ask any follow up questions. Go ahead, Zara.
no, so I was avoiding. So there's only one other thing to add. I can't wait. So this is our meta discussion. Then we're going to get into you're going to take over for us. You're going to talk to us about Rumi and give us a historical context and a context of his works and stuff. And then we're going to immediately in this first class launch into actually what we plan on doing here, which is engaging with the text. There was one last thing I was avoiding sharing, but it's come up 2 or 3 times where it would be useful. So I'm just going to share it, and then this will be the last burst from me, and we'll move on. We'll close out this thing, and we'll move on to the reason why we're mostly directly here. So the question is this: okay, we're talking about mysticism, but we've been putting Rumi and the other forms of literature in the context of, of the rest of literature. We've been putting mysticism in there, but this we can put in the context of something larger, which is the humanities in general. Okay, so the humanities in general are trying to answer the question, what is the human condition? It's a simple question. It's an impossible question. It means, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to live on this earth? And there's all the different disciplines that we use can give us some insight into that. So if you want to answer the question, what does it mean to be a person living on this planet? Geology could be helpful. Biology could be helpful. Physics can be helpful. Chemistry can be helpful. They're all a part of trying to answer this question in different ways. Down a different path, there's there's more literary and subjective approaches. Mysticism is one of those. So mysticism is one of the religious approaches. It's an attempt to induce within you a direct experience with the cosmos as a whole, where the philosophers like Socrates said, well, we're trying to get to the arche and we want to relate to it so that we can know its nature. So in a sense, he was using philosophy to answer the same question. But mysticism and mystical texts are a lot like what Suspicious brought up, which are other methods of getting to the same question, right? So the books themselves are the way to get there. The books purport to be the way to get there, is what they're saying. But there are other ways. You could become well practiced at meditation, as Roger was pointing out, or you could be fasting and praying. There's other disciplines that you could use, or philosophical disciplines, or experiencing nature, or studying science to get to the ultimate answers of the nature of being and things like that. The mysticism is within that context. It's one of the sisters of these different disciplines. And her approach is to say, sit down and let this book read you for a little while, right? It's kind of cool that you can just sort of take the text and say, okay, I'm going to listen to Rumi's poems. And they themselves are not giving me an argument. They're designed to bring me to a place where I'm immediately relating to this cosmic significance, the divine, and we can judge it as useful or not useful, fruitful or unfruitful. We can say it worked for me or it doesn't work for everybody. Whatever we want to say about it, we can say. But that's just putting mysticism in the context of trying to answer. And the other reason that keeps getting brought up is that, well, what does it mean to ask the question, who are we? Well, who we are is who we are in relation to people, as you were pointing out, Roger, or to our family, to our society, to our culture, to the other people on the planet as a species, to the people who share a nationality with us, right? It's how we relate to nature, right? So other animals and plants and the majesty of a mountain and the beauty of a sunset and all of that sort of thing, and the fear of disease and predation. It's how do we relate to those things, and it's how we relate to the divine. And so you can imagine taking any of those other paths and focusing on a specific thing. With mysticism, it says, okay, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take you by the hand, read this book very seriously and pay attention to it. And we're just going to kick open the doors to the divine court and let you meet the queen or king that's in charge, right? It's like you're going to directly interact with the personal force behind it all, or something like that. There's a lot of different type of terminology that people use from different disciplines, and I'm trying not to use one that has too many connotations in one direction, but it's sort of impossible because you have to pick something. But in any case, it's you meet the universe as a whole and give it a hug. Here it is, smack you against each other. And you don't do it through the book giving you an argument for how to do that. You do that because the book itself is bringing you there, or attempting to, or claiming to. So that's more than enough nonsense from me. I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to remove this as well. And I'm going to hand it over and ask you to, We'll take both of those off there. Okay, good. I'm going to ask you, take it away, Roger. On this one, I'll put you on the solo layout. We're going to figure out the tech issues with Twitter and doing a double stream at the same time later. You're still on mute right now, which is why we can't hear you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm unmuting myself both on Twitter Spaces and here on live on YouTube. So I'll try to do a nice introduction to Rumi and also to Sufi mysticism. So as for Rumi, his name was Jalal Uddin Rumi, and he was born where more or less today is Afghanistan. So he was born in a place that was influenced by Islamic culture, and he lived for a big part of his life in where today is Turkey. So and he had a very transformative event in his life. He was born in 1207 and lived up to 1273. So his entire life was within the 13th century. And in the middle of the 13th century, in 1244, his 37-year-old self, a relatively young theologian, this man, he was utterly transformed when he met Shams of Tabriz. He cites it as this meeting was the most transformative event of his life. In his own words, he says, "I was raw, was cooked, and burned." Rumi was a passionate disciple of Shams for 3 years, only 3 years, and he was transformed by this master, after which Shams suddenly vanished. Many scholars believe that Shams was murdered by other jealous disciples. Some even believe that it might have been some family member of Rumi's that wanted more attention, because Rumi was completely his attention was being devoted to this master. He was arguably very passionate about this master. So Rumi was heartbroken, and this state propelled him to institute Sama, the spiritual oratory that accompanies the world-renowned whirling dance of the dervishes of the Sufi order. Rumi would eventually write his masterpiece, his greatest work, the Masnavi, which is 25,000 verses long, a poetic text. And the themes Rumi addresses often involve seeking knowledge of the self and awakening the souls, most of which Rumi considered are asleep. And as regards to Sufi mysticism, so the Sufis are Muslims who heavily emphasize practices of inner purification, which are known as tasawwuf, to reach intimacy with God or Allah. So Sufism is even often termed Islamic mysticism. Also, Sufi music has been central to their practice, most famously expressed in the form of the famous whirling dervishes that I already mentioned, of the Mevlevi order, which is a particular form of expression of Sufi music. Then I have a quote here from a scholar called Jean During on Sufism. So it says, Sama, which literally means audition, denotes in Sufi tradition spiritual listening, and more particularly, listening to music with the aim of reaching a state of grace of ecstasy called Wade, or more simply, with the aim of meditating, of plunging oneself, or as the Sufis say, to nourish the soul. It thus operates in a mystical concert or of spiritual listening to music and songs in a more or less ritualized form. So one word here that is particularly important is the word fana, which means self-annihilation. When the ego becomes effaced in the reality of God, who is to be realized to be the only thing existing. And this is one of the means is through sama, as already mentioned. And there's also shath, which means ecstatic utterance as a result of sama. So there are a few accounts of Rumi engaging in sama and completely improvising poetry, basically reciting poetry as if read from the soul directly. And some of his poems actually were created in this way. So he's kind of in a trance state, in engaging with this music, in this ritual, and his mind just flips a switch, and he starts words of poetry start flowing through him. Okay, having said all this, let's go to the poems themselves. Okay, so let's go. The first poem I already read for in our brief intro, just me and Zara. I think it's worthy to read again for who is listening. So the poem, and then I'll read the poems that I selected in order. It's titled "Who Says Words with My Mouth," and so this poem goes like this: All day I think about it, then at night I say it. Where did I come from, and what am I supposed to be doing? I have no idea. My soul is from elsewhere, I'm sure of that, and I intend to end up there. This drunkenness began in some other tavern. When I get back around to that place, I'll be completely sober. Meanwhile, I'm like a bird from another continent, sitting in this aviary. The day is coming when I fly off. But who is it now in my ear who hears my voice? Who says words with my mouth? Who looks out with my eyes? What is the soul? I cannot stop asking. If I could taste one sip of an answer, I could break out of this prison for drunks. I didn't come here on my own accord, and I can't leave that way. Whoever brought me here will have to take me home. This poetry, I never know what I'm going to say. I don't plan it. When I'm outside the saying of it, I get very quiet and rarely speak at all. Okay, so this poem it speaks to me on so many levels because of how it speaks to my philosophical side. My philosophical pursuits have had a huge emphasis on trying to understand the self and fix myself, basically fix my proneness to anger, fix my the way in which I might feel tempted to negative thinking, negative thoughts, negative emotions, to festering in negative emotions. Also, how can the conscious mind relate to some deeper sense of self, if there is one? What is this deeper sense of self? What is the connection? Is this connection weak? Can we strengthen it? How does this work? So there are so many unanswered, maybe even unanswerable questions related to our deepest most essential properties that this poem speaks so deeply about. And having said this, I'll quiet, like Rumi says, when he's not in his sama personality, and I'll let you guys also intervene. Zara and Ahmad. Ahmad, feel free to ask the microphone and speak your mind as well.
That's an amazing poem.
Please speak in Twitter Spaces as well, and we'll shut away the sound here. I think it will be better.
That's a heck of a poem. The first thing is that he's talking about that exact process that you were talking about. I hate to have the meta discussion when it's a pretty powerful thing to just get into, but we can zoom out for a second, and he's really describing what it was like for him, which I don't know. I wonder, like, it's almost the way he presents what he's talking about. He's doing a second thing at the same time, which is sort of seducing you into thinking in that way. It's almost like you're in the matrix and he's talking to you from outside the chair or something a little bit. You know what I mean? Where he's describing that he himself, his soul is out in from some other place. And it's quite powerful language that he's using. It's awkward to talk about how it makes one feel. So I'm going to shy away from it for now, but maybe I'll get bolder at it later.
Okay, fair enough. Ahmad, nice.
You're on mute on the live stream. Do you have another poem?
Yeah, let's move on with another poem. And between the poems, feel free to raise points or share your thoughts and feelings. These poems involve the fields. I will share the poem that I just read on the jumbotron. Just give me a moment. It's already below in the comments, but I'll share it there as well, and you guys can glance at it as well. So I'll now read the another one that is also very emphasized on self-knowledge and self-development, self-improvement, which is called The Pickaxe. Okay, so it goes, I was a hidden treasure, and I desired to be known. Tear down this house. 100,000 new houses can be built from the transparent yellow carnelian buried beneath it. And the only way to get to that is to do the work of demolishing and then digging under the foundations. With that value in hand, all new construction will be done without effort. And anyway, sooner or later, this house will fall on its own. The jewel treasure will be uncovered, but it won't be yours then. The buried wealth is your pay for the doing the demolition, the pick and shovel work. If you wait and just let it happen, you'd bite your hand and say, I didn't do as I knew I should have. This is a rented house. You don't own the deed. You have a lease, and you've set up a little shop where you barely make a living sewing patches on torn clothing. Yet only a few feet underneath are two veins, pure red and bright gold carnelian. Quick, take the pickaxe and pry the foundation. You've got to quit this seamstress work. What does the patch sewing mean, you ask? Eating and drinking. The heavy cloak of the body is always getting torn. You patch it with food and other restless ego satisfactions. Rip up one board from the shop floor and look into the basement. You'll see two glints in the dirt.
That's impressive.
There's a bit here of mention of self-noting. That is a theme very much explored by Aldous Huxley in his perennial philosophy, where Rumi is one of the central sources he draws from. And this idea of self-noting, it transpires, it permeates many different traditions. So people like Buddhists even say to themselves that there is nothing, no thing as a self, because we are so interconnected with others in the world and with the world itself that we might as well just give up uh, on kind of cutting the self from the rest of the world. It's to the Buddhists meaningless. While people from the Islamic tradition who are Sufi mystics, they engage in sama to achieve fana, which is the self-annihilation, at least for brief instances where they don't, their conscious mind is kind of flipped off, and their inner voice, so to speak, or maybe even a voice coming from God or Allah, is allowed to speak through them, or they just let it flow. And many other instances like self mortification in Christianity as well. Just to give a few examples. Hi, Ahmad. I'm trying to let you speak. I approved your request to speak, but it's not going through. I also invited you to speak. This is possibly a spaces problem thing. Um,
We're working on the tech issues.
yeah, spaces is not by any means a flawless tech. Let's say that. Yeah, I really would like you to hear your thoughts. Ahmad, maybe try to exit the space and enter again, and I'll invite you to speaker. Okay, I clicked approve again. Let's see. Okay, I think you're now speaker. Oh, you just dropped out of speaker again. So yeah,
That used to happen to me in spaces when I scheduled it too far ahead.
yeah. Okay,
People would get kicked out when they joined.
you're kind of giving me the idea to close the space and open another one again. That's a possibility. But first, Ahmad, try exiting the space and entering it again, and we'll make you a speaker. Slate Rider, I'm inviting you to a speaker as well. Okay, Ahmad, let's see if you just go in and out of speaker. Okay, everyone, I will just close the space and open a fresh new one. And it will just take a brief minute. So see you guys there.
Okay, that's good. If you make me co-host, I'll add speaker invites to everybody as they come in. So you can focus on reading. These poems are wild. I keep feeling like he's outside the simulation talking to me while I'm still in it. It's a bizarre feeling. Okay.
Welcome back, and let's see how this works this time. Yeah, it doesn't seem to work at all. It would be really interesting to get more people's thoughts.
Can you add me as co-host? Maybe I can add them.
Yeah. I'm also adding Ahmad as co-host instead of just speaker. Let's see if it works.
Good idea.
Okay, you are now co-host. So this thing is working with you, Ahmad. I think you're now a speaker. At least I saw your sound waves popping in and out a bit. Your sound is a bit low. Perhaps try to have the microphone of the phone a bit closer, if possible.
Mute yourself while he's talking.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ahmad.
I can't hear you, Ahmed.
Yeah, there's something technically not working to let us listen to Ahmad's words. Yeah, maybe it's connection. Maybe it's connection. Okay. In any case, let's go forward with these poems. Just to add to the pickaxe, so a bit of commentary that I have here is one view of identity is that it's a structure made of what we identify with. Inner work is not all ecstatic surrender. Rumi says, pray for a tough instructor, nothing less than the radical disassembling of what we've wanted and gotten, and what we still wish for, allows us to discover the value of true being that lies underneath. So basically, what he's telling us here is that our mind is built during our lives a bit like a house, and it's a house that we won't take with us after we we leave this life. Of course, it's something that is ephemeral and it's perishable, along with our physical body. And it's also a part of it is our personality, which is malleable, it's plastic, and it can change, and it's arbitrary in a sense. If we realize the arbitrariness of it and we peer below it, we can find something that is so valuable, and it is valuable because it is timeless. So the pickaxe for Rumi represents whatever does the attention work. It's like an asana practice, a meditation practice, journaling or walking meditation, prayer, therapy. the honest and deep conversations with beloved friends and family. Those people we love and cherish that only want us to be happy and grow spiritual. So also the bright gold carnelian is a treasure of our own eternal radiance. This work is some work that we cannot delegate to anyone else. No one can do it for us. We need to do it ourselves. So basically, it's a call for us to get to work. The next poem that I have here is called Unfold Your Own Myth. And so it goes like this. Who gets up early to discover the moment light begins? Who finds us here circling, bewildered, like atoms? Who comes to a spring thirsty and sees the moon reflected in it? Who, like Jacob, blind with grief and age, smells the shirt of his lost son and can see again? Who lets a bucket down and brings up a flowing prophet? Or, like Moses, goes for fire and finds what burns inside the sunrise? Jesus slips into a house to escape enemies and opens a door to the other world. Solomon cuts open a fish and there's a golden ring. Omar storms in to kill the prophet and leaves with blessings. Chase a deer and end up everywhere. An oyster opens his mouth to swallow one drop. Now there's a pearl. A vagrant wanders empty ruins. Suddenly he's wealthy. But don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your own myth without complicated explanation so everyone will understand the passage. We have opened you. Start walking toward Shams. Your legs will get heavy and tired. Then comes a moment of feeling the wings you've grown lifting. Pacific, feel free to ask microphone as well. Uh, your thoughts are very well welcome. In any case, I will read the next one, which is called "Say I Am You." I am dust particles in sunlight. I am the round sun. To the bits of dust I say, stay. To the sun, keep moving. I am morning mist and the breathing of evening. I am wind in the top of a grove and surf on the cliff. Mast, rudder, helmsman and keel. I am also the coral reef they founder on. I am a tree with a trained parrot in its branches. Silence, thought, and voice. The musical air coming through a flute, a spark of a stone, a flickering in metal. Both candle and the moth crazy around it. Rose and the nightingale lost in the fragrance. I am all orders of being, the circling galaxy, the evolutionary intelligence, the lift and the falling away. What is and what isn't. You who know Jalaluddin, you the one in all, say who I am. Say I am you. Okay, just giving a little space for people to react.
Wow, that's pretty wild. So there's a coded Atma is Brahman in there. I know we're in Islamic Sufi mysticism, but that's in there, isn't it? Or did I mishear that?
Okay, moving on. The next one is called
Oh,
The Sunrise Ruby,
I was on mute.
and it reads thus. In the early morning hour, just before dawn, lover and beloved wake and take a drink of water. She asks, do you love me or yourself more? Really, tell the absolute truth. He says, there is nothing left of me. I am like a ruby held up to the sunrise. Is it still a stone or a world made of redness? It has no resistance to sunlight. This is how Halaj said, I am God and told the truth. The ruby and the sunrise are one. Be courageous and discipline yourself. Completely become hearing and ear, and wear this sun ruby as an earring. Work. Keep digging your well. Don't think about getting off from work. Water is there somewhere. Submit to a daily practice. Your loyalty to that is a ring on the door. Keep knocking, and the joy inside will eventually open a window and look out to see who's there.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself on both of these at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to learn what we can learn from our experience in the technical sense, and keep refining.
Yeah,
Keep
we'll have
keep.
to sort
keep.
that.
Okay, moving on. We can go forever, basically. It's called This We Have Now. This we have now is not imagination. This is not grief or joy, not a judging state or an elation or sadness. Those come and go. This is the present that doesn't. It's dawn, Hussam, here in the splendor of coral, inside the friend, the simple truth of what Halaj said. What else could human beings want? When grapes turn to wine, they're wanting this. When the night sky pours by, it's really a crowd of beggars, and they all want some of this. This that we are now created the body, cell by cell, like bees building a honeycomb. The human body and the universe grew from this, not this from the universe and the human body. Welcome, Safina. Feel free to ask the microphone and share your thoughts. Probably you joined in the middle of the poem. I'm reading a sequence of poems. I'll read the next one, which is called A Community of the Spirit. And it goes like this. There is a community of the Spirit. Join it and feel the delight of walking in the noisy street and being the noise. Drink all your passion and be a disgrace. Close both eyes to see with the other eye. Open your hands if you want to be held. Sit down in this circle. Quit acting like a wolf and feel the shepherd's love filling you. At night, your beloved wanders. Don't accept consolations. Close your mouth against food. Taste the lover's mouth in yours. You moan, she left me. He left me. 20 more will come. Be empty of worrying. Think of who created thought. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Move outside the tangle of fear thinking. Live in silence. Flow down and down in always widening rings of being. I really love how this one ends. The last two verses encapsulate basically the concept of flow down like water of Tao, and also the widening rings of being as in Stoic circles of care, oikeiosis, which is awesome. He just mishmashed east and west in two lines basically. Okay, the next one is called A Children's Game, and it goes like this. Listen to the poet Sanai, who lived secluded. Don't wander out on the road in your ecstasy. Sleep in the tavern. When a drunk strays out to the street, children make fun of him. He falls down in the mud. He takes any and every road. The children follow, not knowing the taste of wine or how his drunkenness feels. All people on the planet are children, except for a very few. No one is grown up except those free of desire. God said, the world is a play, a children's game, and you are the children. God speaks the truth. If you haven't left the child's play, how can you be an adult? Without purity of spirit, if you're still in the middle of lust and greed and other wantings, you're like children playing at sexual intercourse. They wrestle and rub together, but it's not sex. The same with the fightings of mankind. It's a squabble with play swords, no purpose, totally futile. Like kids on hobby horses, soldiers claim to be riding Borak, Muhammad's night horse, or Duldul, his mule. Your actions mean nothing. The sex and war that you do, you're holding part of your pants and prancing around. Dun da dun, dun da dun. Don't wait till you die to see this. Recognize that your imagination and your thinking and your sense perception are reed canes that children cut and pretend are horses. The knowing of mystic lovers is different. The empirical sensory sciences are like a donkey loaded with books, or like the makeup, women's makeup. It washes off. But if you lift the baggage rightly, it will give joy. Don't carry your knowledge load for some selfish reason. Deny your desires and willfulness, and the real mount may appear under you. Don't be satisfied with the name of who, with just words about it. Experience that breathing. From books and words come fantasy, and sometimes from fantasy comes union. Okay, feel free to request microphone and react. Otherwise, next poem. Next one is called I Have Such a Teacher. Last night, my teacher taught me the lesson of poverty, having nothing and wanting nothing. I am a naked man standing inside a mine of rubies, clothed in red silk. I absorbed the shining, and now I see the ocean, billions of simultaneous motions moving in me. A circle of lovely, quiet people becomes the ring on my finger. Then the wind and thunder of rain on the way. I have such a teacher. Okay, Prashant Kumar mentioned here in comments, is this means presence is the source of everything? Perhaps this presence is the arche. Perhaps it is the most essential property of the cosmos. But we cannot be sure because we have no direct experience of it. And we can only guess that maybe Rumi might have had a glimpse of it and thus inspired his words. Perhaps a glimpse of it while he was in the state of fana during Sama, but we cannot be entirely sure. And also the eagerness to figure this out, to inquire, to investigate further, is one of the reasons why we want to read these poems. We want to enter into contact with the sublime. By entering into contact with the sublime and becoming a bit more familiar with it, we might derive from it philosophical intuitions, which could become philosophical breakthroughs, which could become contributions to fields, and not just to philosophy, to even science and even religion as well. So this is people like Rumi trying to push the envelope of being human in general even. The next poem is called The Worm's Waking. And it goes like this. This is how a human being can change. There's a worm addicted to eating grape leaves. Suddenly he wakes up. Call it grace, whatever. Something wakes him, and he's no longer a worm. He is the entire vineyard, and the orchard too, the fruit, the trunks, a growing wisdom and joy that doesn't need to devour. So I really love how this is not the first time that Rumi mentions this identification with a larger scope of the universe, our sense of identity becoming diluted with the cosmos. Um, this is very similar as well to the Buddha's teaching of no self. The Buddha's teaching of no self is also us seeing the benefit to other beings, other human beings, other nature, both animate and inanimate, as also being a blessing to ourselves, to what we could call ourselves, rather. And so this worm's waking from a single small being that just wants to eat more of the world to a being that encompasses more of the world in its identity that suddenly doesn't need to devour. This is completely a 180 turn from basically the extreme of consumerism, of needing to feed more on the world, of having more wants and more needs. And if there are too many of us in this kind of state of being, probably we would devour the world eventually. So the turning our endless ambition inwardly um, solves two problems in one swoop. It avoids us consuming the world or engulfing it in flames. It avoids us burning the landscape, and it also aids us in furthering our self knowledge, our self development, being more thoroughly ourselves. Okay, I'll end my rant and go on with the next poem. So the next one is called In the Ark of Your Mallet. Don't go anywhere without me. Let nothing happen in the sky apart from me, or on the ground, in this world or that world, without my being in its happening. Vision, see nothing I don't see. Language, say nothing. The way the night knows itself with the moon. Be that with me. Be the rose nearest to the thorn that I am. I want to feel myself in you when you taste food, in the arc of your mallet when you work, when you visit friends, when you go up on the roof by yourself at night. There's nothing worse than to walk out along the street without you. I don't know where I'm going. You're the road and the knower of roads, more than maps, more than love. Okay. And the next one is called The Guest House and goes like this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them all at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Feel free to share some words.
So I'm stopping myself from sharing right now because of the tech issues.
Okay, sure. Moving on, I think I'll do like a couple or two or three more, and then we can call it a day and go for Wednesday, and we continue. Okay, so this one is called Two Kinds of Intelligence and goes like this. There are two kinds of intelligence. One acquired as a child in school memorizes facts and concepts from books and from what the teacher says, collecting information from the traditional sciences as well as from the new sciences. With such intelligence, you rise in the world. You get ranked ahead or behind others in regard to your competence in retaining information. You stroll with this intelligence in and out of fields of knowledge, getting always more marks on your preserving tablets. There is another kind of tablet, one already completed and preserved inside you, a spring overflowing its spring box, a freshness at the center of the chest. This other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnate. It's fluid and it doesn't move from outside to inside through conduits of plumbing learning. This second knowing is a fountainhead from within you moving out. Okay, next one. Imagine a man selling his donkey to be with Jesus. Now imagine him selling Jesus to get a ride on a donkey. This does happen. Jesus can transform a drunk into gold. If the drunk is already golden, he can be changed to pure diamond. If already that, he can become the circling planets, Jupiter, Venus, the moon. Never think that you are worthless. God has paid an enormous amount for you, and the gifts keep arriving. Okay, I'll end the space since we are continuing on YouTube. And Prashant Kumar mentions that the guest house being ourselves and the guests are thoughts or emotions. These come from beyond, so don't resist. Yes. So maybe some of the most foolish reactions to emotions is to grabbing hold of on them and either pushing them away, which just delays them and makes them linger longer, or even getting too attached to them and grasping at them. This probably will cause some stagnation on our on the system within us, and probably we are at best when the system is flowing, continuously flowing. Okay, I'll go to the next one, which is called "Which is the road by which I came?" Which is the road by which I came? I would return, for it likes me not here. One moment's absence from the beloved's lane is unlawful according to the doctrine of lovers. If only in all the village there is someone, by Allah, a sign would be completely sufficient. How shall the finch escape? For even the simurgh is footfast in his stout snare. My heart, do not come wandering in this direction. Sit here, for it is a pleasant station. Choose that desert which augments life. Seek that which is full-bodied. The rest is all scent and image and color. The rest is all war and shame and opprobrium. Be silent and sit down, for you are drunk, and this is the edge of the roof.
Can you repeat that line? For even the simurgh is what?
And so the next one, maybe the last one. Can you hear?
Yes, we could hear you anyway, but you couldn't
Okay.
hear us. Can you repeat the line? For even the
So this
simurgh
one is
is what?
called "The One Thing You Must Do." There is one thing in this world you must never forget to do. If you forget everything else and not this, there's nothing to worry about. But if you remember everything else and forget this, then you will have done nothing in your life. It's as if a king has sent you to some country to do a task, and you perform 100 other services, but not the one he sent you to do. So human being come to this world to do particular work. That work is the purpose, and each is specific to the person. If you don't do it, it's as though a priceless Indian sword were being used to slice rotten meat. It's a golden bowl being used to cook turnips, when one filling from the bowl could buy 100 suitable pots. It's like a knife of the finest tempering nailed into a wall to hang things on. You say, "But look, I'm using the dagger. It's not lying idle." Do you hear how ludicrous that sounds? For a penny, an iron nail could be bought to serve for that. You say, "But I spend my energies on lofty enterprises. I study jurisprudence and philosophy and logic and astronomy and medicine and the rest." but consider why you do these things. They are all branches of yourself. Remember the deep root of your being, the presence of your Lord. Give yourself to the one who already knows your breath and your moments. If you don't, you will be like the man who takes a precious dagger and hammers it into its kitchen wall for a peg to hold his deeper gourd. You'll be wasting valuable keenness and forgetting your dignity and purpose.
Can you hear me?
Okay, so I see Prashant Kumar here mentions, so can the guest house lead to determinism view from Rumi? I don't know about Islam, but Christians believe in free will, right? Well, for the most part, most denominations in Christianity, I believe, they hold that free will is a thing. Many Western philosophy also espouses the idea that free will is a thing. Even for many Eastern traditions, there are many Eastern traditions as well, and schools of philosophy that believe that free will is a thing. For instance, the Brahmins, the Jains, the Buddhists, for the most part, the different schools or denominations believe that free will is a thing, and that you must therefore use your free will wisely to accomplish your purpose, your duty, your dharma, your raison d'être, uh, in drawing from the Japanese, your ikigai. And so I don't think that the guest house by Rumi leads us necessarily to determinism. We might feel feelings by someone, for instance, attempting to insult us, and if we have a strong attachment to our expectations that everyone will treat us with respect and honor and reverence, and someone suddenly out of the blue attempts to insult us, he will literally be like throwing a rope at us, and we will be tempted to interpret that rope as a snake, and will react as if it were a snake. We will be playing snake throwing basically with one another. And if we are keen of senses and keen of our inner self and our inner cosmos, we will figure out the ruse, we will figure out the ploy that is going on, the play, the act, and we will be able to choose to instead of feeling anger, to perhaps laughing, to laugh about the situation. Someone is throwing a toy at us, and we can choose to not make a fuss about it. This is only to give one idea. So we will welcome that attempt at our anger, laughing at it, and this anger will just permeate us. It will come as a dark cloud, just pass over us, and we will be left unscathed by it, and others around us will be blessed as well by us having the wisdom and the self mastery to be unscathed by such a fleeting moment of anger. So I hope I answered your question. There is a lot to unpack in how we deal with feelings and emotions. According to, for instance, drawing from the Stoics don't espouse repressing feelings and emotions, contrary to popular belief. They also don't espouse redirecting inflamed emotions like anger, envy to other productive things. They rather uh, emphasize the importance of furthering self-knowledge, be it regarding the emotions themselves, be it regarding uh, beliefs that we might hold, like the belief of everyone owing us respect and reverence, when that is more like a privilege and not a right that we can expect from everyone in this less than perfect world. And so if we can conceptualize an ideal interchange between people that have attained a nice level of self-knowledge and self-mastery, probably we will only see courteous exchanges going between these people. For one thing, they will have been completely they will have completely overcome the impulse to try to beat the others in the head with their propositions and eagerness to prove that they are above them and they are in grasping truth more than the other, to kind of one up the other. And so if people have overcome that, have transcended that, they will try rather to approximate the truth of the cosmos, whatever that may be, regardless of the tradition, philosophical school, religious beliefs and religious practices, etc.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, feel free to talk now, Zara, that we are exclusively on YouTube. You made a really nice point here.
I think the audio is working now. We're having some tech issues,
I
but
can't hear you.
that's what I'm wondering. So,
Hold on. I can't hear you because I had silenced the computer. Go ahead.
okay, cool. That's fine. We're dealing with some tech issues. Luckily, they were behind the scenes because you were reading that fantastic poetry, and there was nothing to worry about. But man, I was so hesitant to say anything because those poems they kind of just have to exist on their own, and it was really fun to just sort of let them, just to listen to them. I was astonished at how many spiritual imagery and insights were in his poems that were very directly the same as those from other religious traditions. I mean, there was a poem where the Atman is Brahman was clearly a concept he was talking about from the Hindu. And I'm not saying he took it from the Hindu, but that
Yeah.
concept's from the Hindu, and that was clearly in his poem. Also, the conceptualization of us as children to a heavenly father or as sheep to a shepherd within relationship to the divine was in there from the Judeo-Christian perspective. I knew I was looking forward to being introduced to Rumi, but I'm thrilled to death to be introduced to him. He also, I don't know how to share this without it being awkward and weird. It's this mysticism thing is a new place for me to explore. But well, okay. So first of all, there were. See, I'm trying to avoid saying what I wanted to say. I'm going to go off on something else. There were techniques in there, and I don't mean that in any sort of a negative sense, but there were hypnotic techniques in there that I don't think he was consciously even, they were just coming out in the way that the poem was inspired for him. You said that he was sort of channeled this energy and the poem came out, but there were hypnotic techniques of going deeper and broader and the flow of the water and all of that stuff was in there. I'm not sure if that's what's causing this to happen, but I think it hasn't been since I was a teenager that I've had such intense feelings of deja vu. As you're reading the poems, every single line you're reading, I feel like I've heard it before, even though I know I've never heard it. And it's a really bizarre experience consciously to be hearing it and say, well, I know I've never heard this before, but every single line is hitting me from, it's almost like being inside the matrix, but having someone outside the simulation talking at you while you're sitting in the chair. It's really bizarre. And I really hesitated to talk about that at all because it just sounds freaking crazy, but he's powerful.
It's not crazy at all, I'd say. Maybe he's saying things that equate to whatever it is that is written in this permanent tablet that he says that we have within us. Maybe he is kind of reading from that, thanks to the state of fana that he achieved in these sama sessions.
It's
And
bizarre.
also when he engaged in dialectic with Shams of Tabriz, there are accounts that they two would converse with each other in a dialectic, in a very transcendental exchange, and probably they both of them would get into a different state of consciousness just by the back and forth.
Who is this?
Shams of Tabriz, the roving dervish who was Rumi's master for 3 years.
Okay.
So he hit Rumi a bit like Socrates hit Plato, but Plato had I think 20 years with Socrates. Rumi only had 3 years with Shams.
So, do you remember the line? It was about 6 poems back or 5 poems back. The line about the Simurg, I think it was, and even the Simurg stands or something like that.
Yeah.
See if I can. I wrote it down. Let me see if I can find it here. Do you have that line? For even the Simurg is something.
Yeah. I'll find it. I just need to do Control F and yeah. So this line goes, it's from Which is the Road by Which I Came, the name of the poem. And the line is, how shall the finch escape? For even the simurg is footfast in his stout snare.
Foot fast in his what?
In his stout snare.
Stout snare. Interesting.
I'll add it to the comments.
Snare. So I remember the story of the Simurg, and it might be worth repeating really quickly, although I don't understand what that line means exactly.
Please share.
Okay, so the idea of the Simurg is it's if I got it correct, and I really should have known to look it up first, but if I have it correct, it's something like a play on words where there's 30 birds, and the Simurg is referring to 30 birds in the language, and that they're on a journey to Mount Kat or someplace to see the divine, to find God. And they go on this journey to find God. But there's this play on words where Simurg means 30 birds, but it also means the God that they're searching for. And so through the journey, they come to realize their oneness with the divine. I hope I didn't ruin that or butcher it in any way. So in the poem, he says that this one bird can't be free of its cage, for even the Simurg is footfast in its stout something.
Stout snare.
Stout snare. All right. Well, I'm going to have to look into that to know what the heck it's talking about. That's interesting,
though. These poems, I'm drawing them from different sources, like the Masnavi, and also the Essential Rumi by Coleman Barks. Coleman Barks is, I think he was or is a Presbyterian or member of some other denomination in the United States, who was challenged by kind of a guru to pick up Rumi's literal translations and give them poetic life in English, in the English language. And thus he did. He made the poems really sounds poetical as they should in their native language. I think the Masnavi was written originally in Persian. At least there's a website of the Masnavi, and it shows both Persian and English. And so, yeah, Coleman Barks is was basically the person responsible for my first contact with Rumi through his book, The Essential Rumi. That is a really soul nourishing book full of poems, just one after the other. And they, uh, unlike kind of Homer or the Ramayana or whatnot, that also kind of make your mind race in an intellectual kind of way, because you're thinking about all this major plot lines and stuff that's going on, and what does it mean for the human condition, etc. As Rumi, in contrast, you can just chill, relax, just let the thing hit you. Let the poem do the heavy work, literally, and just let yourself engage with it. Whatever your inner self is, get your inner self gets nourished, or so to speak, your soul becomes nourished by these poems. And I found Rumi's poetry as a very nice counterbalance or counterweight to the dense philosophical texts that I read before and after Rumi.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying that you can do a lot of really, really hard cognitive work to get to a revelation that you could just listen to a poem to and have it hit you in the face.
Yeah.
It's I really thought that I was going to be less impressed. I mean, I thought I'd be impressed, but I thought it would take a lot of like pulling it out and wrestling. It's really just incredibly profound, and what he hits you with is incredibly profound. And what that translator accomplished is a heck of an accomplishment. That's man, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you wanted to do this course at all, because this is a heck of a thing to be introduced to. This is going to be quite a journey. So let's we're going to be meeting on Wednesday, and we're going to continue mostly with our reading of the poetry. We'll probably do what we said earlier and have some time to discuss some of those other topics about mysticism and how it works and all that other stuff. But mostly what we're going to be doing from now on is this really enjoyable time of the poems that you've curated and pulled together. I think they flow amazingly well, and I'm really looking forward to being able to do this on Wednesday and Saturday nights. So thank you.
Yeah. It's fairly easy to put these poems in a sequence, like a developmental sequence, as in the first poems are addressing basic questions about self, and kind of hammering you with this idea that you think you think you you figured it all out. You haven't. And then you start to think, well, this guy is just making it patently obvious that I'm not thinking about the self, or I'm not engaging with the self as I could be. I could just be going to the max with this potential that's not being actualized. And then the others start to show that by doing this repeatedly and successively as a ritual, you will start to alchemize your soul. You will start to climb this ladder of being, of self, of identifying the way you identify with being in general, with the cosmos and all. And he eventually gets to points where he has poems that really drive the nail on what it means to be a noble leader, or a crappy leader, and addresses the problems involved with leadership. And clearly, people who go through this kind of gauntlets of really furthering self-knowledge, self-mastery, and self-improvement, uh, or at least in this dimension, a bit closer, I would say, to the ideal of a philosopher king. And probably this is an incomplete work, an incomplete process that involves Rumi and many others like him. Um, which is exhilarating, really, because if we figure out the tradition that is needed to systematically produce and consistently produce people that are apt for leadership without the trappings of narcissism, psychosis, and other stuff, because they have figured themselves out and they have transcended the thing of ego manifesting, we can kind of upgrade society just like that. We just need to figure out the tradition first, I'd say.
I think that's a perfect note to end it on. I'm going to stay here with whoever's in the live stream after we end the broadcast, and we'll do some after conversation. But amen and hallelujah is the only thing to say to that. So that's good. Let's end this once I learn how to click it.